All right. We can't afford to remain silent when it comes to the issue of any form of abuse. Our role within society is to make the choice, take the risk, and support our brothers and sisters. While any form of abuse is a complex problem, the fact remains that prevention is possible. Good evening, viewing audience. On behalf of 242 Domestic Violence Support Network, I would like to thank you for joining with us this evening in our live Zoom discussion. My name is Siobhan Hollis. I am the founder of 242 Domestic Violence Support Network, Inc., and the co-founder is Ms. Latanya Maynard. Without any hesitation, I would now introduce our very special guest speaker. He is a 20-year police veteran. He worked as a special victims unit detective for 12 of those years, investigating child abuse crimes. After making the decision to retire from law enforcement, he decided to use his extensive background and genuine insight to educate others on the effects of trauma and abuse, thus creating the 12 Project. He has delivered the keynote presentation and workshops at the International Child Symposium on Child Abuse in Huntsville, Alabama. He delivered a plenary presentation and workshops at the San Diego International Conference on Child and Family Maltreatment in San Diego, California, and has spoken at events sponsored by Darkness to Light, Janessa, and numerous child advocacy centers across the United States. In April of 2019, he traveled to the beautiful island of Bermuda to help train the law enforcement officers about child abuse and child sexual assault. In addition, he has also helped businesses and organizations create a healthy work culture. His workshops demonstrate how not understanding the effects of trauma can hinder an employee's work performance and productivity. He emphasizes people are a company's greatest assets, and how they're treated will determine the success of their company. So please, ladies and gentlemen, and our audience, welcome Mr. Kevin McNeil. Thank you so much for joining with us this evening, all the way from the United States. Welcome, sir,
Thank you.
and go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here from Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you for your listening audience, and thank you for your time and your dedication and your love for this topic. I thank you. And for all those who have joined, thank you so much for giving this your attention, for giving this your love. And I am grateful to be in your presence. I'm grateful to be of service to you. So let's get started, man. I'm excited.
Definitely. So, what I would like to ask you, Mr. McNeil, is to take us through your journey. Take us to the beginning of I should say, pre 12
Yeah.
project, the 12 project. How was it
Yeah.
started? What's your journey?
Yeah, the 12 Project is an interesting company that I started in 2017. You know, I was a law enforcement officer. I was investigating crimes. I was a police officer for 8 years, and I got involved in a life-altering situation where I was in a car chase with some murder suspects, and I ended up having to use my service weapon and had to shoot someone and almost lost my life. I was by myself. I was against four armed suspects who had just killed someone, and I got into a car chase with them. And at that particular point, I wasn't really ready to face the fact that law enforcement was that dangerous. But I saw so much trauma and so much trouble in our world in those 8 years, and then I was called up to be a special victims detective, which I didn't even know what that was at the time. It was a opportunity for me to get off the road and to have a situation that was less dangerous for me. And I began to see so much abuse firsthand. I began to investigate child abuse crimes, sexual abuse crimes, And as a abuse survivor myself, I began to realize that this impact that it had on our world. Now, mind you, up until this point, I never thought about my abuse. I became very separated from who I was because at the age of 12, while living in Memphis, Tennessee, here in the United States, I was walking home from school one day and I was kidnapped. Um, and I was robbed and dragged on a set of bleachers. And a guy actually raped me. Um, a man I never met before. He dragged me on a set of bleachers, me sexual assaulted me, and then tried to kill me, tried to murder me. Um,
Mm.
I was able to get away from that person, able to fight my way away to freedom. And I ran all the way home and I never told anyone. I actually lied to my mother and told my mother that the person robbed me and that was it. And she begged me to allow her to call the police. But as a male in our culture and society, I knew even at 12 that if I got out, that my life would be changed forever, that I would never be able to live my life as a regular person. So I lied and said I was robbed. So the neighborhood that I grew up in was very, it was very rough neighborhood. So that was not far fetched. So it was almost like a badge of honor to be able to be robbed and survive it. But little did my mom know, little did other people know that I was sexually assaulted, I was raped, I was made to do some things that, that was unimaginable. And I lived the rest of my life with that secret. And even becoming a police officer, I had this secret within me that this had happened to me. But once I become a special victim detective and I started investigating crimes and I started listening to other victims of abuse tell their stories, it just so happened that one of the cases was that of a little boy who was sexually assaulted by his uncle. And as I listened to this little boy and I listened to his courage and I saw him transform in front of me, I saw him become a different person as he was able to tell his truth. Something within me shifted, like the little boy in me jumped for joy, like, hey, this little guy can tell his story. Why can't you tell your story? And that was the beginning of a new beginning for me. And that was when I decided to look into trauma, look into child abuse, and started finding out about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. I started finding out that my abuse really shifted my brain and changed the way I saw life, the way I saw myself. And I began to realize that I wasn't a bad person, but that something bad happened to me. And so everything made sense, like my sexual addiction, my alcohol addictions, everything I was doing to cope with my pain makes sense to me now. And so this little boy, as I watched him as a detective, helped me uncover and unlock the mystery of my life. And so I went to the police department and like, hey, we need to do more than just respond to abuse. We need to educate ourselves about the effects of abuse and how to interact with victims. Because as police officers, we knew how to arrest suspects.
Mhm.
We knew how to talk to them. We knew how to get information from them. But we was horrible. We sucked at talking to victims because nobody taught us to interact with victims.
Mhm.
And that's when the police department told me basically, in so many words, that they paid me to lock people up and not to advocate and support victims. And that's when I made that I was going to turn in my badge, my gun. After 20 years of doing what I love, I gave it up. I told them I could no longer do this.
Mhm.
And so in 2017, I was reading a scripture in the Bible. It was Matthew 10, 1 through 2. And that was interesting because Matthew 10 and 1 and 2 equals 12, right? And it
Mhm.
said, and the scripture read that Jesus called the 12 disciples. He gave them power over abusive spirits. And that just hit me like, whoa, like this is what the purpose of the gospel was for. It was for healing people from abusive spirits. And um, I quit. I gave them my gun and my badge. They couldn't believe me that I was serious. And I told them that I no longer want to do this. I want to get out in front of abuse and not just respond to it. And so I called my organization the 12 Project based off that scripture 10, Matthew 10, 1 through 2, that Jesus gave the 12 disciples a mandate, a goal right? Wasn't really just to spread the gospel, but it was to heal people from abusive spirits. And so
Mhm.
there, the 12 Project was born. 12 was at the age that I lost my virginity, the age that
Okay.
I got raped. It was the age that my life changed forever. And yet it was 12 disciples that Jesus used to change the world. You know,
Mhm.
12 is a number that means renewal, restoration, 12 months in a year, right? That 12 jurors on a jury stand, that means justice.
Mhm.
So I named my organization the 12 Project because my goal was to educate and to bring restoration into the world and healing into the world so that people can understand that abuse wasn't just a one-time thing. It was something that was occurring in our world that we needed to address and
Mhm.
that we needed to encounter, and we need to bring healing into the world.
I have a question. Just
Mhm.
going back, you mentioned that you never told your mom. Have
Yeah.
you ever, after that, let's see, as an older adult, have you ever really told her what happened?
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, that's an interesting question. Um, Somebody called me and to do an interview. It was a magazine editor that called me and asked me would I do an interview. It was Child Abuse Month, and they wanted me to talk about my abuse as a male from a male perspective, and I agreed to do it.
Mhm.
However, I thought about if I did this interview for this magazine, it would be public, it would be nationwide, and I didn't want my mom to find out the truth about what happened to me from a magazine article. And so I had to call my mom and I told my mom, "Hey, mom, you remember that day I showed up with no shirt, no shoes. I was
Wow.
bleeding. My jeans was mixed with blood." She was like, "Yeah, you was robbed." And I was like, "No, mom, more than that happened." And so I briefly on the phone, but I waited till I got home, traveled back to Memphis, and I told her in person. That was one of the hardest things that I ever did in my entire life
Wow.
was to tell my mom the truth. But what I came to understand was my mom kind of knew that was more to the story than
Mhm.
I had said that particular night. It's just that mother instinct. And what is interesting is that my mother went through a similar thing in her past.
Mm.
Uh, my mom, while going to work one day at a bus stop, was put in the trunk of a vehicle, and a guy attempted to kidnap her.
Wow.
Um, she says she got away. She was able to kick her way out of the trunk and get away. And there are times in my life we never had this conversation, but I wonder that my mom tell me a partial truth, just like I told her a
Mhm.
partial. Like did
Mhm.
something happen to her, and she only told me the part of the story that she was comfortable with. So
Mhm.
I use that example to tell people about intergenerational trauma. Like trauma doesn't it addresses.
Mhm. Wow,
Yeah.
interesting. So I wanted to kind of dive in with you as because after speaking to a few survivors,
Mhm.
in terms of like you said, the reason why you really left your police position, or I should say the force, do you feel that as law enforcement officers or in those type of position, do you feel that there needs to be more reform, there needs to be more, I would say, a training in empathy or understanding victims, whereas, sometimes victims feel like they're not being taken seriously, or perhaps they feel like they're being judged by officers. What is your, I should say, your kind of outlook on stuff like that in terms of as an officer, and also, when you were a victim of abuse at the age of 12, do you feel that it
Mhm.
has changed, or it's the same, where it's not taken serious in terms of as a victim?
I think it's the same. I think even as a 12-year-old little boy, I knew that if the police came that
Mhm.
and interviewed me, it wouldn't have been a good thing.
Okay.
Intuitively, I knew that police officers wouldn't. They were not sensitive to the fact of what happened to me. It would almost have been like, he should have been home at this time. Why did he leave? in a form of victim blaming. I feel that law enforcement needs to be retrained on the effects of victimology. Law enforcement goal is to prosecute and to bring people to justice or to put people in jail. It's really not victim focused. And oftentimes, what happens as law enforcement officers, we re-traumatize the victim and we use them to get information so that we can put someone in jail. And that is real. That's a real tragedy because what happens in the victim's perspective, the brain, what happens when a victim is traumatized is that the part of the brain that recognizes stimuli from external world view becomes extra sensitive, like the part of the recognize watches for safety and protection becomes extra sensitized. And a lot of times what happens at law enforcement officer, we're making faces or we're looking down and writing while we should be listening, paying attention. And as for a victim, unconsciously, their brain is telling them that this person is not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of time what happens is that the information that officers are looking for, the memory, we're asking victims to revisit that area and that space that the trauma occurred. And for a victim to do that, they have to feel safe. They have to feel like the person that's sitting in front of them is really concerned about them rather than what happened to them. And oftentimes, law enforcement hinder their own investigation because the victim's brain begins to shut down. The hippocampus, the part of the brain that's looking for that memory, begins to shut down because the person doesn't feel safe. And law enforcement, our perception is because we're law enforcement, people should trust us. People should feel comfortable around us. But that's not the case, right? People, there's a book out called Crime Victims Speak, and I studied this book, and it troubled me when I realized some of the victims were saying things like they felt worse talking to the police than they did dealing with the suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Like they remembered how the police made them feel more than they remembered how the suspect made them feel. And that was troubling to me because I knew it was the truth, right? Because I knew law enforcement officers, even including myself, who made victims feel like it was their fault that this happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the reasons I resigned because once I found out, and I was angry, to be honest with you, that I was a detective and nobody taught me how to interview a victim. Nobody taught me about victimology. Nobody taught me about adverse childhood experiences. Nobody taught me what a victim goes through. And yet here I was a victim and I understood unconsciously what it meant to be a victim. But I had put that aside so that I can do the job.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, when I saw this little boy in this interview, he reconnected me back to who I was and made me feel like, wow, I wish there was somebody who had trained me to listen. Because here's my thing, I say that being heard leads to being healed.
Mm-hmm.
I love what Arthur Miriam says. When listening stops, the healing process is aborted. When a person feels like they're not heard, it distorts their ability to be healed. And law enforcement has a listening problem. We're trained to see with our eyes evidence that we can physically see and confirm with our eyes. But when it comes to abuse, you have to be able to listen. And I often tell people the word heart, right? The word heart, the root word of heart is ear, right? And in the middle of heart is ear. And then before you can ear, right, is the H in front of ear, which is hear. In order to
Mm-hmm.
hear, to have a heart for the victim, you have to be able to hear, but you have to have an ear to hear the pain and what the victim is saying to you. And
Mm-hmm.
law enforcement has a history of not being able to hear because of implicit biases that we carry within ourselves, and we're trying to see and not to hear. But this is the only type of investigation, the only type of encounter with victims that you must be able to hear. Because if you're trying to depend on your eyes to see abuse, you're going to be a bad investigator, because by the time you see abuse, it's already too late.
Yeah, you mentioned a good wording. That is my first, I think, care and victimology.
Mhm.
Would that incorporate sensitivity as well, or probably victim sensitivity, meaning in regard to a police officer? Like, do they train you guys as well to have some level of sensitivity to certain matter, or it's strictly like you say to lock up, what exactly is victimology at the simplest way
You're,
of
you're breaking up. I
explaining
can't.
that particular wording?
You're breaking up. I can't hardly hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Okay, let me see. Hold on. Hold on 1 second. You can hear me better. Sorry about that. That's my internet connection. I was saying if you could elaborate more on victimology. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So if you can elaborate more on victimology, that
Yeah,
word, I've never heard that before.
yeah. Victimology is the study and what happens in a victim's brain when a victim is traumatized. Because oftentimes what happens, we try to determine who's a victim, but that's the victim's responsibility to determine their level of victimology. Like, you don't get to determine if I'm a victim or not, right? Because what may be okay to you may not be okay to me, right? You don't get to measure the trauma that I experience, because somebody cussing you out or somebody saying something bad to you may have a different effect than it has on me, right? So, but what happens is, oftentimes what happens is that we try to put ourselves in the victim's shoes. We try to, well, if that were me, I would have. Like, if like for me, for instance, for me as a 12-year-old, somebody might say, well, if that were me, I would have fought his, I would have never succumbed or would never, you know, submitted to his desire to rape me, right? But you're not me, right? And you'll never know what you're able or capable of doing, or what you would have done unless you're put in that position. So what happens a lot of
Yeah.
times is that because we have not been in that position, we try to judge the victim based on what we think we would have done, right?
Mm-hmm.
So victimology is the understanding of listening to the victim and their experience and how they felt and what it is that they are communicating to you without judgment, without bias, right? To hear that victim say, I felt powerless, because that's what abuse is. The word abuse is a compound word, right? Use is the root word of abuse. It's where we get our
Mm-hmm.
word utility from, which means purpose, power, or potential. And AB is the prefix. And AB means to kill, steal, or to destroy something. And we know that anytime you put a prefix in front of the root word, it changes the root word. So if use means utility, purpose, power, or potential, and the AB means to kill, steal, or destroy, abuse or abuse means to kill, steal, or to destroy someone's purpose, power, or ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the first things I want to do when it comes to a victim is empower them, the power they felt like they lost. And a victim telling a story is one of the most powerful things. And for you to not believe that story, or for you to in that story, robs them of their power. It re-traumatizes them, because now what you are saying to that victim is that, are you sure you're a victim? Did you not allow this to happen? And so oftentimes law enforcement is putting more of a burden on the victim to prove that it happened than they are
Mm-hmm.
to hold the suspect accountable for them actually making this event happen. So victims, by the time they come forward, they feel like I have to prove this happened. No one asked a murder suspect to prove that they were murdered, right? No one asked a burglary suspect to prove that their house was broken into. No one asked an assault victim, like, hey, were you shot? The shot itself is proof that they were shot. It's only when it comes
Right.
to abuse victims that abuse victims have to prove that it happened. And law enforcement makes that even more difficult by not only the questioning that they have to uh, endure from law enforcement, but also, I mean, think about it. You know, we bring victims into police departments. These are the same places we interview suspects. We don't even have a special place to interview victims, right? We bring victims in the same place where suspects are interviewed. You know, police departments with steel chairs, no windows,
Mhm.
gray, the drab walls, whatever, like the one behind me, right? What does that say to a victim if I have to come into a place where I don't even feel respected? I don't even feel, it would be different if I came into a place that was specifically geared for victims, smiling faces.
Mhm.
A quote on the wall said, "We're here to help you, heal you." Waterfall, soft music, right? This
Mhm.
place is for you.
Mhm.
But we tell you to come into the same place where we interview suspects. And
Right.
so,
So you feel like your privacy is violated, and like you say, you're open, so you're not really um willing to share. Right? It may be
yeah,
more like go to a doctor's office and like we'll take off your clothes. He's like, but people, other patients are here. So I
yeah,
do understand that. Now on the topic of abuse, because abuse is a very complex topic. It's very extensive from physical to sexual, etc. So if a victim comes in, from a former student, comes into these station, like like who is such a bruise, you can see, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that from a policeman mindset train of thought, they probably would most likely tell one that has the physical um, abuse as opposed to the person who they don't see anything. They just feel like, okay, you're telling me you've been sexually assaulted. But, you feel they take physical abuse more important or deal with that more as opposed to sexual abuse?
I couldn't hear you. I think you broke up again.
Okay, sorry about that. I was saying, as a police officer, the training would they take physical abuse more serious than someone who comes into the police station who may have mentioned they was sexually assaulted? They need more training in what they can see in terms of someone who's a sexual assault victim.
Okay, I think you still broke up. I think what you were asking was, is that do I think there's additional training needed um, for
Yes. For them to understand victims more of sexual assault as opposed to physical abuse. Physical, you can see from their bruised eyes, bloodshed eyes, bruised lips. Obviously, you wouldn't have to question me if I've been assaulted. Whereas if I came in there, saying, well, I was assaulted, do you feel that officers need more training in the sexual assault aspect when it comes to victims?
Yes, I do. I think that you cannot group investigations the same way that sexual assault investigations, the same way you do any other type of investigations. And I think that's law
Mm-hmm.
enforcement major issue, a major problem is that they use these investigations. There's a reason that I don't know about Bermuda, but in here in America they call them special victims detective. And as a
Okay.
reason they call them special victims detective because you have to be trained and you have to have a certain type of individual or person to investigate these type cases. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
just put anyone in this position. There has to be a passion and a desire and a willingness to educate oneself and be educated on how victims respond to trauma and sexual assault and abuse and neglect. And there has to be extensive training in regards to how do you understand what a victim goes through. You know, they teach homicide detectives how to understand the trajectory of bullets as they enters the body and what kind of impact it causes upon the body that causes the trauma to the body that causes the person to lose their lives. But when it comes to special victims of sexual assault crimes, we don't get that same type of training, right? They just tell us to investigate the case. They don't tell us about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. They don't tell us that sitting in front of a victim, right, and interviewing them in face to face can be very threatening to them, right? Because the brain now sees that as a confrontation, right? They don't tell us that the brain not only associates the assault with it happening, but also how it happened. For instance, if I go to the hospital and a victim is laying in a bed, right, in a supine position where they're laying down, and I stand over the victim and interview the victim, that the brain recognizes that as being similar to the same position the person was in at the time of their assault. The suspect was standing over them, hovering over them in a very authoritative position as the person was in a very vulnerable, submissive position. So the brain now connects that position and that interview as the same situation or environment that the assault occurred. So it shuts down. And so while I'm asking you to where why questions, the questions that I'm trying to get to extract information from you, the brain can't remember because it's in a traumatized state. And the first thing that happens is that the hippocampus, the part of the brain that remembers, now doesn't operate properly. So when a person is not able to give the detective the information that they're trying to get in the detective's mind, this person uh, may not be being truthful or forthcoming, but they don't realize as a detective, you have just recreated that traumatized situation so that you have become the victim, you have become the hindrance of your own investigation. Rather than teaching me to sit down beside the victim, right? And actually my authority and my stance and my victim where they at and giving that victim the option to look at me when they talk to me. So giving them back the power they felt that they lost and making that victim feel safe around me so that they know that I'm there to help them and not just to extract information. Oftentimes during investigations, I feel is that the law enforcement officer or the investigator is there to take information from them, and they don't really care about what happened to them. And one of the things that victims are really concerned about is, do you care, right? Do you care that this happened, right? I can provide you information, but if I put a victim in a situation where all they feel is you're trying to use me to get something, then you just done what the suspect has done, right? You have put the victim in a position where they feel powerless. They don't have a choice. So law enforcement has to retrain, particularly in this part of law enforcement. We cannot treat this area of law enforcement like we do other areas of law enforcement. When it comes to abuse cases, we have to be specific and we have to be very careful who we choose to do these type of investigations.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Because someone, for instance, like I said, with my, my family member who's in charge of
Mhm.
that part, but I think still dealing with homicide. Specifically, you really need a specific department and
Mhm.
personnel that are especially trained in sensitivity areas or are able to, like you say, handle it in a more subtle,
Yeah.
comfortable way. So I wanted to ask you, because we're getting at 7:30, what I wanted to ask you is, what are the challenges from your experience, personal experience, or perhaps, through your career as a former detective? As a male, what are the challenges with a male coming forward? I know you said it even at 12, Um, what are the challenges that men have in terms of speaking up about abuse? Um, if you could elaborate on that, or tell me as a female, why do males struggle with talking about abuse as opposed to a woman?
Yeah, yeah. It's very challenging because we live in a patriarchal society where men are considered to be strong and not weak. We consider men not to have emotions. We consider men not to be vulnerable to abuse, right? When a man comes forward and say he was abused, he's considered a weakling. He's considered less than a man. And so a lot of men keep abuse hidden, and they refuse to talk about it. But what ends up happening is that when you take power away from a man, he seeks it in other forms. For me, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, I saw power in sexual escapades. I saw power in trying to have sex with as many as women as I could to regain some sense of power. In doing so, I became abusive myself, right? Because I was using women I was objectifying women. I wasn't seeing them as persons. I was seeing them as sexual objects for my gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is men either become abusive sexually, they become abusive physically, or they may turn the abuse in on themselves internally and turn to alcoholism. That was another form of abuse that I experienced by abusing substances, drugs, and alcohol because I felt powerless. And so if I could pick up a bottle or do some drugs, I felt like I had control over that, right? We seek power in different
Mm-hmm.
forms. So when we don't give males the permission to feel and to hurt and to express that pain, they're going to find alternative ways to do it. Now, I saw ways that I would deem as less violent, but it was still abusive. Now, there are other males who would seek to externalize that pain and actually become violent towards society and culture and start doing things in very violent ways, whether it be robbery, whether it be murder, whether it be gang violence, uh, whether it be suicide, right? So there's different ways that males tend to deal with this emotional pain. And there's a reason there are more males in prison than there are females, because females are often given the permission to feel pain, but males are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is that when we start talking about abuse, we must not think about abuse in extreme forms, such as what happened to me, sexual, physical, but we must talk about neglect as well. We must talk about
Mm-hmm.
males being brought up to say, you can't cry. Big boys don't cry.
Right.
Why in the hell did God give us tears? Right? So
Mm-hmm.
if men, right,
Yeah.
if men want the men to cry, why the hell did God give us tears? Right? But
Yes.
we force men not to feel. And the one thing that
Mm.
I've learned is that emotions cannot be hidden. They're the most true, they're the most pure essence of who we are, right? When we
Yes.
can't feel, we find alternative ways to express those feelings.
Oh my
That's why
goodness.
males seek power in different forms, whether it be through success, it can be through overworking and success, it can be to womanization. We use women as symbols of power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so women are looking for relationships with males. And one of the things I tell women when it comes to male is that you must understand that the male that you encounter, you must be able to ask that male and him to be honest about what is he struggling with, what kind of power
Mm-hmm.
issues that he has, what was it like for him growing up. I give females advice sometimes. So if you're on a new date, You know, if it's just you and the guy, right? When you go to a restaurant, ask for a table for four. So,
Okay.
you know, and
Okay.
so the two empty
Explain that.
spaces, yeah, the two empty
Yes.
spaces, you need to ask each other, who did you bring with you, right?
Oh,
What baggage?
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So who did you
Clue.
bring with you, right? So we need to
Uh,
discuss who you bringing with you, who you
yes.
carrying, what baggage are you carrying, so that we gonna
Yes.
get to know each other. I need to get to know the invisible person that you're carrying with you, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
and believe it or
Wow.
not,
That is so deep.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
believe it or not, men want to talk about what's hurting them. They want
Really?
they yeah, men want a woman who can look at them and listen to them without judging them and say, baby, I'm hurting, right? They want a
Right.
woman who can see them at their weakest point and still love them as if they were still Hercules in their lives, right? Men want a
Right.
woman who can see them fail and yet be the one who picks them up, right? That's what men want, but we're afraid. We're afraid of that. We're afraid. And so oftentimes what we give you the fake part of us, right? And we
Right.
give you
That
the,
that part, that
yeah,
person in the chair.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We give you the bravado, but we don't give you the heart, right? You looking for
Right.
the heart, but we don't give you the
Yes.
heart because we're afraid if we give you the heart, you're going to take it and you're going to crush it. But that's not what women want. Women want to caress and they want to support the heart, but men are afraid to give it to you. So we give
Yes.
you what we think you want. And so we give you that part of ourselves that's not ourselves. And so you end up
Right.
getting the shell and not the male, right? And so uh
Wow.
that's one of the things
That's
I
the,
really deal with. Yeah,
that's the truth.
yeah.
It is the truth because you want the real, like, you want the mask removed. You know, I
Mm,
think a lot of people, you know, they want this mask and this facade and whatnot. But
yeah.
like you say, you want the trueness. And it's okay to ask questions, you know, and I see where you're coming from because a lot of damaged people are walking around. A lot of
Mhm.
people with skeletons, a lot of people with, you know, burden and issues, and like you say, traumas of the past. You know, sexual abuse, I'm sure, goes on until you, like, you speak about it, you speak it through and to heal. But
Yeah.
certain things, I'm sure, is trigger points, or you know, would kind of bring up the memory somehow. So that's the area, and that leads to my I would say last question for you.
Yeah.
As a former victim, or I would say as a survivor of sexual abuse in your case, do you feel that, right? Let's say I'm dating someone I may not have known because they say men kind of keep things to themselves unless you know you kind of pull it out of them. But still, you know, they probably won't shell everything. What would be a way for a woman to find out and to, it might be with the answer for all women, all men in those cases, all I would say survivors, but what would be a comfortable way a female who, let's say, spouse or partner may have revealed that they were a former victim of sexual abuse? What sort of support or what would be required for that woman to assist that man in healing and speaking the truth and being a support?
Yeah, that's something that I think should be normalized. I think we shouldn't just assume that a male on the surface has never experienced anything traumatic in their lives. I think one of the things, if you're really going to be in a relationship with a male, is to give them the space and the opportunity to say, "Hey, uh, I heard there's some experiences in my life that have brought me to a place where I am today. You know, the reason that I'm so
Mm-hmm.
effective, the reason that I'm like my wife would tell you that uh, I don't like to be told what to do, right? Uh, so anytime she tries to help me, it's a form of help, but I come off and say, I don't want your help. But
Okay.
instead of judging me for that, kind of asking me,
Right.
what's the origin of you not feeling like, because I
Not
feel
wanting,
like,
right.
yeah, because I felt like, I have to prove myself. I'm always performing. I had to prove myself,
Okay.
to be
Okay.
a man, because in my life coming up, I felt like my manhood was
Right.
at an early age. And so
Okay.
I think one of the things is become curious. I always tell people curiosity leads to compassion, and compassion leads
Mm-hmm.
to connection, and connection leads to communication, right? Communication
Mm-hmm.
starts with curiosity. If you're going to communicate
Mm-hmm.
with your mate, be curious about why they do what they do rather than judging them why they do it. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
love when you're judging, right? Even yourself. It's hard to love
Yes.
yourself when you're judging yourself. So when you
Mm-hmm.
see your mate respond, just know that that's their more truer self. That's their pure self. When you see the behavior, rather than judge the behavior, become curious about it and inquire about it, because behavior sometimes is impulsive. And I always tell people
Mm-hmm.
your brain is smarter than you, right? Your unconscious, right, it seeks to self. And oftentimes what happens, the unconscious will respond to things
Mm-hmm.
without you even being conscious of you responding a certain way. But the people around you would be conscious that you responded a certain way that was not in line with what was done. For instance, if my wife says, Kevin, you know, why didn't you do XYZ? And I just blow up and say, why are you always questioning me and judging me and trying to get me to do something the way you want me to do it? Like, that just doesn't line up with what she asked, right? So
Right. Right.
at that point is an opportunity, instead of get angry, because what we normally do, we snap back. Like, who you think you talking?
Mm-hmm.
Like, instead of
Mm-hmm.
saying, wait a minute, are you okay? I'm trying to help. You got angry when I asked you, could you an alternative way? Is there
Mm-hmm.
something going on that you want me to know about? How did I feel right then? Well, you made me feel like I wasn't able to do what I needed to do as a man. Well, baby, sweetie, I wasn't trying to make you feel like that. Can you kind of unpack that and help me understand where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens now is, now he realizes, wait a minute, I have a mate or a person who's really trying to understand me. And at the same time, I realized I was responding that way, right? Now I have a person who's
Mm-hmm.
brought me forward and allowed me to realize that I've been a way that's unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And this person enough about me to be concerned about my responses rather than judge my response. So that goes back to my my conversation about listening. Right? Here's the problem. Oftentimes we're so much in pain ourselves. See, when you're in pain and you're dealing with your own stuff and you're not in the process of healing, it's
Right.
hard for you to hear, right? So because now what happens is you get in this competition for the same thing that you desire, that person desires as well, which is to be heard.
Right.
So unless you come into this relationship, understand that we both got issues. That's why I told you about that, set the table for four, although it's two of you.
Before. I
Yeah,
got it.
so just to
Right.
understand that there's always somebody with you.
Yes.
Introduce me to the person you brought with you.
Yes.
So if I can
Yes.
get to know the person you brought with you,
Right.
to understand you, right? And then once we get to understand each other, we can dismiss the other parties. We don't need
Right.
them no
They
more.
can leave. They can
They
give her
can leave,
permission
right?
to leave.
Yeah. Yeah,
Pay the
because
bill
here's
and
the
leave.
truth. Yeah, because here's the truth. You're really dating the person they brought with them. That's the truth.
Really, of course. It's
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
mask, like remove the mask and really
exactly,
see who you are. And
exactly.
and
So,
and
yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I do love the part where you say table of four. I was afraid, like,
yeah,
where are
yeah,
they? But I do agree because in essence, that's where we can find out more of that person, meaning, okay, lay it on the table for me, so to speak, you know.
hmm,
But it's a bit difficult because I think most times when we as human beings meet each other, we have on this mask and we try to put on this sort of, this perfect, this
yeah,
everything, all I's dotted, all the T's crossed, and like you say, there's a mask underneath. Let me see that other person,
yeah,
So I agree. I totally agree with you, and I feel those are conversations to find out. The person asked. Would you say that would be with every person dating, or just if the relationship is moving in a more closer connection, or you just do that with anyone as a single person out there who may be listening? Should they find out who that other person is right away, or it depends on if you feel you're taking your relationship to another level?
yeah. I would say to always assume that everyone has experienced some form of abuse. It may not have been extreme forms of abuse, but in their mind, it
Right.
was abuse nonetheless. They have been traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be a parent telling them that they were not smart enough, whether them
Mm-hmm.
being bullied in school, whether them being made fun of because of a particular characteristic that they had or shown. Everyone has
Mm-hmm.
experienced something. I love what Alice Miller says, child psychologist Alice Miller says. She says your childhood lasts a lifetime, and that's powerful
Wow.
because,
That's
right?
it is.
Yeah, because what happens to your childhood carries throughout your adulthood. You never
Yes.
forget your childhood. And there's a reason for that because the part of your brain that develops during childhood is the emotional part of your brain. That's the part, the limbic system, the
Mm-hmm.
survival brain, the reptilian brain. That's the because your prefrontal cortex or your conscious brain doesn't develop until you're over 18 or 21. So most of your experience as a young person has to do with your emotions, has to do with your being, has to do with your actual essence. And so what happens is, and I always tell people, when pain is separated from the womb, the children experience the scars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes we experience pain in childhood, but in adulthood is when
Mm-hmm.
we actually go through the actual experiences of the wound or the scars of the pain. And so when they're
Mm-hmm.
separated, we can't connect. Why am I so angry all the time? Right? Why don't I trust men? Why don't I trust women? Well, if you don't reconnect that pain that happened to you way back when you were hurt as a child, your brain remembered that pain. Then what
Mm-hmm.
happens is you act unconsciously. You're not conscious of your behavior. And so what happens is that until we understand that everybody comes with some form of pain or history, and if we're not seeking to understand that history, then misinterpret their behavior or their distance or their inability to connect with us as a choice
Mm-hmm.
when it's really a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism.
Right.
And so
Wow.
I tell people as individuals, if you're really serious about relationship, first of all, understand your relationship with yourself because that extends grace to other people. When you can understand, like for me, for instance, right? I was introduced to sex in a forceful way. My virginity was taken from me in a forceful way by a man who overpowered me. So
Mm-hmm.
the only value I thought I had as a person was in my body. So
Right.
because now I become overly sexualized and I see my power and my worth in sex. So for my wife to understand, or for other people to understand, he's highly sexualized. He's a sex addict. It's not because he chooses to be, but that's how he understands his value in the world, his place in the world. And then I have to understand, right, that there are people who actually love me for me and not what I'm able to bring to them physically, but who I am as a person, right?
Mhm.
I can't take rejection, physical rejection, as a sign that people don't like me or I'm unwanted because a person doesn't want to have sex with me. It's just that they may want to get to know me in a more deeper, compassionate way. Or they may have had bad sex
Mhm.
as well, right? Sex for them may
Mhm.
not mean the same thing that it means to me. And so that becomes, that takes a lot of mature, but it takes education. It takes these conversations that you and I are having on a
Mhm.
constant level. We can't just have these conversations every now and again. This has to be a conversation that's
Yes.
had weekly, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to get to the point where we're saying, you know what, let's heal. Let's be honest, right? Jesus says the
Mhm.
truth, you should know the truth, and the truth will set you free, but you have to know it first. And
Right.
that's the problem we have. We don't want to know the truth. We want to pretend that it's
Mhm.
not, and we want to
Mhm.
continue to move. But the problem with that is I tell people resiliency, people always talk about resiliency. I tell people my definition of resiliency is like jumping up in the air and landing back down. Jump up in the air and land back down. Yeah, you moved up, but you never moved forward, right? You're
Mhm.
still in your same place, right? So resiliency is the
Mhm.
beginning of healing, but it's not the end of it. If I'm gonna be resilient, it
Mhm.
means that I can survive where I'm at. But I don't want to just survive where I'm at. I want to move beyond where I'm at and to progress
Mhm.
towards something that's greater than who I am today. So I think that's the major lesson when it comes to uh, relationships. We were meant to be in relationship. That's why the Bible
Mhm.
says, and Jesus says, God says, not good for man, a woman to be alone. We are meant
Yes.
to be, trees are connected to the ground and limbs to the tree and fruit to the limb, right? Everything has a
Yes.
connection. You can't produce without a
Yes.
connection. And so one of the things that saddens me that as men, because we're hurting, we hurt our women. But women are the most precious, it's the women are the most precious thing on earth, man. That's why God took his time with the woman. He put man to sleep because women have a womb. They produce, they
Yes.
nurture, they care for. And if we hurt our women, we're killing ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And because in the way to hurt the women is to damage the men,
Mhm.
right? Because if men don't learn to love, cherish, honor, love their women, then what's going to happen is it's going to have reciprocal effects, transgenerational effects, because now the children are going to get the nurture and the love they need, right? And so as men, we have to heal. That's why I started my organization, the Trauma King. And I got a new book coming
Okay.
out called Heal Man or He Man, Why Men Must Get
Okay.
Their Shit Together. Right.
Right.
So
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
When would that be released, the book?
that'll be in March of next year. Uh,
Okay, wonderful. Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
So
Yeah.
I would say drop it off. If someone is listening, I'm sure, and would like to reach out to you, just basically tell us how they can reach you. Um, and the name of your organization again.
Yeah, it's the 12 Project, www. The 12 Project, as you can see it on my shirt. Oh, it's this way. 12 is
Yes.
spelled out, 12project.com. They can reach out to me. They can see the work that I'm doing.
Right.
Actually, in the process of starting an online network where people can go 24/7 and they can hear videos. I call it camp, where people can go to camp
Yes.
with me. Camp stands for Child Abuse Monthly Prevention and Education, because I
Okay.
think we can't just talk about abuse one time in April. We have to talk about it every single time
Yes.
as much as we can.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so they can reach out to me
Okay.
that way. and just see what I'm doing. They can go to Amazon.com, check out some of the books that I've written, and just connect with me that way.
Sure, wonderful. And you said you're in Atlanta. Did you
Yeah,
say you're in Atlanta? Okay, because I was trying to figure out, like, did I ask what the time zone on? I'm actually an hour ahead of you, as you know.
yeah.
So just to wrap it up, I wanted to say thank you so much, Mr. Kevin McNeil. It's been a wonderful hour talking to you. I've gained such knowledge about abuse, support for abuse, education in terms of the law enforcement part of it. I'm
Yes,
sure it will not be our last conversation, perhaps
yes,
the
ma'am.
last virtual, maybe the next in person,
Yeah,
provided COVID, dies down. But it's been a very informative session. I thank you for lending your time to us. I know it's a holiday weekend, Good Friday, but I thank you very much for your attendance this evening. And I wish you a wonderful journey with your 12 project and your upcoming campaign, new book release. I'll certainly go on Amazon, look at your books and order a few. I love to read.
thank you.
And if there's anything else you want to wrap up with, I'll give you the last few minutes.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, as always, to share my passion and my desire to educate the world on the effects of abuse. I'm so grateful that you shared your platform with me. You shared your audience with me. For those of who are listening, I just want to encourage you that a new day is coming and things are going to get better. Just hang in there, and that we're going to heal together, and we're going to make this world a better place. So keep your head up and be blessed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to our audience, have a wonderful evening. Thank you for tuning in.